Call this meeting to order tonight. This is the Budget and Finance Advisory Committee. It's Wednesday, January 22nd. We'll just start with, go around for attendance and introductions. Penny Duba, Superintendent.
Jen Lima, School Committee Member.
Bob Jones, Community Member.
Leslie Ann Powell, Director of Finance.
Thank you. We do have other members on this committee that were unable to make it this evening. The next item on the agenda is public comment. There is no one here, so we'll move on and get right into the presentation that we have. Well, not presentation, but documents that we're going to go through for the budget for the fiscal year 2026. Everyone has the Excel, the PDF, but the printout of the budget along with comments from Leslie, our Finance Director. So what we'll do is we'll go through each page line by line. I know you were able to see it prior, so there were some questions, but we'll go through that, and then just whatever questions there are or other information that might be needed, we can go through. Our plan is between tomorrow and Friday. If there's anything that we need to add or change for the school committee meeting on Tuesday, we'll be working on that. So, good, we'll just start going through, and I'll ask Leslie just to walk us through.
Sure. So, a couple things to note as we're going through it. So obviously I'm sure it goes without saying, but this is a working document. So this is by no means, set in stone, everything we're looking here. Obviously, if there's things that anyone on the committee wants to contribute or comments, we're going to take that all into consideration as we're getting ready to present this to the school committee. There are certain things that we are still working through, so I'm sure you saw in the notes there's a couple of departments. There are some staffing things that we're still working through, so like the FTEs in the staffing are not final, and some of those numbers, so because we're still making some of those changes and having those conversations, I didn't go through and update them. I wanted to make sure that it wasn't getting convoluted. So just know that there's some stuff in here that's we're really confident with. There's some stuff that we're still working on. So as you may have noticed, the format is a little bit different than we have done in prior years. So the approach that I took was to provide a document that rolled everything up by department so that it was a little bit more public facing. I think it's a little bit easier for the public to understand what's being spent at the high school or what's being spent in IT, as opposed to just having lots of lines that can get a little confusing. And then what I did is I supplemented that, and again, this is more for the committee and the school committee, I supplemented that with some narrative to try and explain why we're making the decisions that we're doing, so that as you're looking at these numbers, there's a little bit of context behind it. Obviously, we can certainly talk about them in more detail, but the hope was that this document would maybe eliminate some of those quick hit questions that you had, so that we could really try and get down to the nitty gritty and have more time to discuss some really important priorities. So the first page of the document is what we're calling the sum of expenditures, and that lists all of our operating expenses by department, excluding salaries. Then we have the section that has salary and benefits. For our overall total expense, obviously the goal is for that to equal what we're expected to get in revenue. So that's what we're still working on now. And then the bottom lists out what we're anticipating our appropriation to be, our ask to the town, the state aid that we have presently received, and what the other revenue, whether it's tuition from other LEAs, preschool tuition, interest earnings, things like that. That's what falls under that other revenue category. So important to note on this page is that I have updated the state aid. So this document does include the state aid numbers that came out on January 16th. So what you'll notice is that we do have a $32,000 reduction that we're expected. Now, this is obviously not finalized. We'll get additional numbers at the end of June, or end of June, with the governor's approved budget. But right now we're looking at $32,000 in reduction, so we are gonna have to look through and find out where we can offset that elsewhere in the budget. If there is anything specific with regard to just the overall sum of expenditures, I'm happy to answer them. If not, I'll move on to start going into each of the individual deep dives of each page. Does anyone have any questions?
The state aid number, where did that come from, Leslie?
So on January 16th, they published like an initial draft of that, so it is posted on the RIDE website.
I will make a copy for the,
Yeah, no, I have one, but it doesn't match that number.
So there was one that came out that was originally like the governor's numbers that went to, the municipalities.
Yes.
And then there was one that was published the next day by RIDE.
Oh, good, this one's better, okay.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, exactly.
Okay.
So the original numbers, we
I'll
had a
take this
loss
one,
of about
yes.
146,000.
Yeah, exactly, okay, perfect.
And so, the next day, the RIDE did send out a notice saying that they've updated it because there were parts, I believe it was, some of the MLL funding
Okay.
and some of the high-cost special ed that was not taken into account with regard to
In
the
those
one
numbers.
that we're on
Okay,
15.
perfect.
So this, and you'll notice in my notes, I did originally say that we were holding state aid flat, and then when the new numbers came in, I did go in and update it and amended that.
Okay.
So, with regard to revenue, I'll move on to that, we'll do an overview of kind of what I'm anticipating for revenue. So you'll notice in prior years, we did have that required $500,000 that we carried over from fund balance. Fiscal '25 is the first year that we don't have that requirement, and I do not have an anticipated request that we would have that this year. So that's why you'll see that, difference. And just for a point of reference, because, I know that this is something that would jump out at me. So if you're looking at past documents where we have fiscal year '23 actual and you're looking at what the total revenue was, you will notice that it's different because if you're using audited financials, it will have any amount of money that was reappropriated from fund balance because it comes, the way we do it in our system, it comes into the general fund and then goes out of the general fund and into, like the capital reserve
Yep.
account. For the purposes of this, I wanted to have an apples for apples, comparison,
Yep.
so I didn't because it would make the numbers look
Higher.
very, very
Yep,
different.
okay.
But if you were looking at older documents like prior budgets, that, reappropriation of fund balance probably has those full numbers in it.
Okay,
So you will
thank you.
notice a difference. So I just wanted to point that out, cause I know I was, worked really hard to make sure that we were aligning. Tuition from individuals, this is primarily the pre-K tuition. So if we're talking about the preschool, that is the funding that's going into that line. Tuition from LEAs, this is, the majority of this is the Jamestown revenue. So one of the things that we had done last year is we held the rates the same from fiscal '24 to fiscal '25, and that's part of the contract. So I am working right now with Jamestown to come up with the new figures. We're working for what the rates are gonna be for this year.
Okay.
I don't anticipate them being drastically different. Where I think we might see an increase is, the tuitions that are coming from other schools for CTE programs that
Okay.
are coming in. So that's where that increase is coming from. I don't think it's gonna be tremendous, but I do, just based on the students that we have
Okay.
coming in, I do think there'll be a little bit of an uptick there. Investment earnings, so I was a little bit conservative on this. Bob, I know you had questions, I don't know if you wanna talk
Yeah,
about this
I-
now.
I think, well, I'll just start with the year-to-date.
Mhm.
I assume that's the 6-month figure.
Yes,
It's 324.
Yes.
Now granted, Federal Reserve has stated there might be 2 rate cuts
Mhm.
and things will flow. But I think 250 is too conservative. I think you should do a, 0.25 basis, 0.5 basis reduction and see what those numbers look like, because in couple prior years, the investment was grossly underestimated, and that gets supplanted by local taxpayers, which isn't really fair. So I just think that that number should be relooked at with the same cash flows as generated this year, but with increasingly reduced rates, and see where it falls.
okay,
And then let the superintendent and school committee decide if, what's the appropriate scenario that balances some degree of conservative budgeting against the fact that every dollar you under budget here generally comes from the local taxpayers. So, I would just say, personally would say, start at 280 and then see, given what the year-to-date is.
okay. And I will will certainly take that back. I'd love input, Jen, from you if you have some, just because I know that this was a topic that we discussed, in great detail with the last budget cycle. And since I was not a part of that, it would be just interesting to understand like what the school committee was thinking when we had that discussion originally.
We had no visibility at all to any of the actual like backup that was generating that number, like, and so I agree with Bob, to a certain extent that like, knowing that we have consistent, you know, higher performing returns, to budget higher this year, but just, maybe keeping in mind that things might be, like, I don't wanna over, but I do not want to under. I think maybe, like Bob said, sticking at 280, at least like level fund that revenue,
Okay.
and then,
I think when we were talking about that, cause 280 is what was in this year's budget,
Yeah.
right? So FY '25, and when we were looking at, you were just shared with me a concern, which I think is, you know, it's a concern we all have around interest rates, right? The interest rate was 5.25, then it went down to 4.5.
But yeah, I think it's 4.5, so.
So, you know, it went down mid-year. So we're just wanting to be, you know, cautious with that as well. I also hear both of you like looking at it and
Right.
making sure, because if there's funds that are there that can be used to offset the budget, that's,
Well, again, I'd say, I don't know how many months the rate adjustment is in, but you're already 45,000 over budget and it's only half year.
And it just occurred, actually, I got the notice 2 days ago.
Right, so it would be,
Two
it would
days
be
ago that it
interesting
just occurred.
then to, let's assume it's 4.5, and project out what that flow would look like, and then do 4.25 for 3.75 maybe, and see what that stream would look like, and then just present options for the administration and the school committee to consider where it falls. But I definitely think 250 is too low.
And I will say, I don't disagree. When I was doing this, this was with the thought that the rate could possibly reduce, so this was even before it happened. And I have been very careful to make sure that I am watching how we keep our money in the bank, how we're using that investment account, really keeping an eye on it and trying to make sure that we are utilizing it to the best that we possibly can to benefit the district. So my main reason was not just the interest rate, but also not having been here for the conversation of why it was, I mean, I think a few years ago it was at 60,000. And then, you know, there was this big jump, so wanting to, like I said, be conservative and not understand or know all the history, but now having the background and understanding that and seeing your comfort level with it, I'm very comfortable with raising it. I've been watching it very closely, and I have our staff account, and I said, I wanna know the minute it hits 280, when you get those bank recs, I wanna know what the date is when we're getting there to see what our comfort level is with increasing it, because if we keep doing what we're doing monthly and staying on track on top of it, I do think that we probably could be somewhere around the 280 or 300 comfortably. I do.
and 2 years ago, it was 580.
Last year.
That was
Last year.
in FY '24.
Last year
That was the
580.
actual revenue.
Okay, then I will, so at least for the purposes of Tuesday, we're comfortable with going
yeah, I would love
280?
that. Yep.
I'm
I think so.
happy,
Yep.
if that's what we're comfortable at,
Yep.
I'll move that, okay.
I'd add with the proviso, if you could do some scenario options for the committee to consider.
Okay. Okay. So going through, one of the things that I've included on here, but it might look a little different on some of the other documents, is the rental income that goes to capital reserve. So I've included it here just so you can get an idea of where it falls every year, but then this money typically comes out and it gets put into that capital reserve fund. So if you look at other documents, it might say 0, it looks like there's no money there, but I put this in for point of reference. And just, to give you an idea, I've left it at 25 because that is typically where we land. Last year, it was low because we had that money that went back to the musical fund.
Right,
So,
okay, yep.
so it was at, I think it came in around 21 or 22.
Yeah,
but
'cause we
then
gave them like 14 or 15.
We give them some
Yeah.
money back. So I feel comfortable keeping it at that level, even though it looks like it was a little bit lower last year. Medicaid, this was, this was one that I definitely wanted to discuss because I did reduce it from what we had. Just because I'm basing it on the actuals, and the actuals were kind of inconsistent year over year. One year we were really high, then we're at 350, then we went down to 308. And it's a conversation I wanna have with Dr. Santa, just to find out what that flux, why that's being caused and what the reasons are, but I was very hesitant to want to go too far above what the actuals were this year, because I didn't have any data to show me that we could consistently get it back up to that 350 mark. And again, it's one of those things where I'm happy to, hear anybody's opinion on, do we wanna take that chance, and just know that I'll have to work with Dr. Santa to really work to see, how we can improve that reimbursement, or do we want to take a more conservative approach?
Is the district still paying a firm to help with this?
Yes, we are.
And has someone asked them the effectiveness of what we get for the money you pay?
So that
Because this seems to be a continual problem of not getting full, let's say, potential.
okay.
We can look at that. I mean, a lot of it has to do with Medicaid, it's the type of services and evaluations that we're doing, services that students are getting, evaluations that are being completed, and then the appropriateness of the paperwork that's getting filled out to go back through to Medicaid for the claims. So we can look at that. We can have a talk with Dr. Santa as far as like what we are seeing right now, as far as in general, the services that are reimbursable through Medicaid. Maybe what do we see throughout the district of how many of those services we do have, and then looking at also the staffing that can be Medicaid reimbursed as well.
I think there's also the consideration, so with our CRP, there are things that if they're, in the CRP, what you can and can't bill for, what makes sense, and I know that Dr. Santa has been really working to improve what we're doing with the CRP and use that as best as we possibly can, and I don't know if that has had some impact on how we've moved things around in there and how that's changed what our billable items are. So I think it's twofold. I think we have to look at both sides of that. But unless, I'll leave it as is unless someone feels very strongly about it. Indirect costs, so this is what is received from our grants. This is what we take out as our administrative costs for the grants. I would say 2 years ago in 2023, we were able to capture a large amount of our indirect costs. And last year, we did not take as many as anticipated. A lot of that had to do with ESSER. So in 2023, there was a big chunk that we could take out. I think we took 32,000 on ESSER in the first year. Last year, we opted not to use all of our indirect costs. We put it toward actual programming and different items. But with ESSER being gone and that not being a factor, I think 50,000 is reasonable based on the grants that we have right now, because it's mostly the CRP, Perkins grant, things like that. So I don't see it as an issue having that revenue, but I don't think we should reduce it or increase it. I think it's right where it needs to be. And then other sources, that is kind of, some of that's like proceeds from insurance and things like that. It's kind of hit or miss. Then looking back, I actually went back a few years to look at it, and it was all over. So I think keeping it kind of mid-range and not really counting on it or anticipating it is probably the best course to take. And then the bottom is just breaking out our general aid. So with state aid, you can see that if you add up the numbers, you can see that 38,200 is not rolled into that total at the bottom, because next year that multilingual learner money is now actually part of that 13,380 that's listed at the top. So it's all combined. So this total number you have is just our high cost special ed and the formula aid that we have. So all told, with that, we are looking at, if I just grab everything with outside sources, we have 18,629,004 is what we're kind of anticipating without any of the changes that we're making. So we would be looking at town appropriation of 63,823,289. Again, that's just based off of that initial presentation that we had given to the town with what we were anticipating for operating expenses and based on certain percentages. So, I feel like this is a good starting point for us, but that, obviously that's gonna change as we go through the budget cycle when we start talking about what our actual needs are and where we need to fall and what the school committee thinks is an appropriate ask, based on those needs. Yeah.
Just two general comments
Sure.
on this thing. I think once for the school committee,
Mhm.
I don't know if they've, well, the superintendent too. I don't know if you've had your, hey, what can our legislators do for us meeting yet? The non-public transportation. We still pay for kids to go to Monsignor Clark,
We still, for charter schools,
Mhm.
and we get
private
nothing
schools.
back because
No.
we opt for a different method than the rest of the state, which I think has a lot of merit, but we get penalized for that. And I think it's time the state, or our state legislators who represent North Kingstown should at least have a conversation about saying, why is North Kingstown penalized for something that every other district in the state gets reimbursed for? Because it was written, as I understand it, to force districts into the statewide system, which, you know, I again think there's a lot of merit for us having our own.
Statewide system is
Correct.
not, if you talk to most districts, they're
Correct.
not seeing any type of reduction or savings by using
Correct.
statewide.
There's actually, I'm sure you probably know the Transportation Commission that the House is doing, and they asked us, we went to the training for the school committee this weekend, and they're actually looking for districts to come testify to just what you're talking about. And they had a whole, I was looking at their website and the documents that they've had today, and, like what you said, things are not going well in that area.
We do have statewide here for some
Yeah.
of our busing, and it is very hard to budget because the formula changes in how they do their calculations.
And I might be biased here, but I think our local charters and the local independent schools get better service from North Kingstown busing than they would if you had statewide and forced them into
Mhm.
that, and yet we get reimbursed zilch for it. So that's just a point to
Yeah,
the
no,
school
it
committee.
is on our radar already.
To take it.
Yep.
The second part is, since the audit's done, correct?
Yes.
And after it's presented, I do think it would be wise for the superintendent to get with the school committee and do the updated fund balance review. Not saying that you should reappropriate some of it, but
But
I'm
we-
saying you should
we
have the option
Have
to
talked about
consider reappropriating for some
Mhm.
reasons I think we'll talk about later. And you don't know what you don't know until you present that to the school committee, and so they can also make their notional, the things that the school committee and superintendent do on terms of fund balance. So again, my point is the sooner the better,
Mhm.
if you could have that as a school
Yeah, we have
committee
an
agenda
audit
item.
meeting.
Yeah. Yeah, it's on our
Monday
agenda
night.
for the budget meeting,
So-
yeah.
Yes, and so I believe the audit's being presented on Monday
Monday night, we
evening.
have that meeting.
And so the hope is that then we'll have the official public numbers that we can then put, we can update that document and we can have it, because obviously it's critical to what we're doing now with the budget, so that is the hope. Okay, so only because I know we could probably be here for 4 hours going page by page, line by line. So I just wanna make sure I'm being respectful of everybody's time, but I'm also for getting the most out of what we want to do this evening. I think it's important to go through the benefits and just like the salary of kind of where we're sitting right now, obviously with a lot of things, cause I'm sure there's some questions with that. And then, once we get through that, do you want me to just do high level of where we're looking for each department? And then if you have specific questions you can ask, do you wanna go into just questions that you have from your initial review of the document? Whatever.
I'm okay with just questions, I don't know about you, Bob.
Yeah, I would,
I don't know how much, cause I
Where-
know I didn't give you a
where-
tremendous amount of time to review the whole document, so I,
where's the big variances,
okay.
right,
Mhm.
in terms of,
Mhm.
of thing? And, yeah, I'd start with there and then the conversation, I think that will lend itself to the other conversations. So.
Sure. So, so let me do the benefits and we'll do a quick salary, and then we can go through questions of that, and then we'll talk variances, some of the areas where things have changed. So, the key things to look at, so I have the benefits listed a little bit differently than we've seen in the past. I wanted it to be broken out so that instead of just being rolled up to one number of benefits, so we can actually see, and I think that this is important for people to understand, you know, what that giant 17 or 18 million dollar is, you know, what it goes toward. So obviously the two highest things that we have with our benefits are our health and our pension. That is where we see the most expense that will come out. Right now, for fiscal year 26, this budget is based on 6.5% increase in healthcare. Now, with my conversations with Blue Cross, that is kind of in the middle. They're saying it could be anywhere from 4 to 8%. So,
And when does that get finalized?
April.
That's what I thought, I remember.
A very inconvenient time
Yeah.
is when it gets finalized. So, as you saw, we had this past year, we had budgeted at 5%, it came in at 6.5%, so then we had to scramble to figure out how to come up with an extra 1.5% in that budget. We also had the issue in fiscal year 25 where the pension rates had gone down, and then the pension rates went back up, and we saw $400,000 again variance in what we had.
That's a big swing.
So all told, we had about a $550,000 swing from what we thought it was gonna be to what it actually ended up being. So in my conversations, we went with 6.5%. If the committee thinks that maybe we should go higher just to be safe, I'm happy to do that. Like I said, he said it could be anywhere from 4 to 8%.
It's 6.5% of the 25 budget, 6.5% of.
So it's based off of our working rates. So I factored in what our actual working rates are, across all of the different plans that we have, and it's a 6.5% on those working rates, keeping our deductibles the same, or our HSAs the same. So it's hard to do a straight percentage on how it is, because it is based on,
Gotcha.
you know, if you have all of your teachers who all have a family plan,
Right.
and then you have ESP who does it, the percentages are gonna look a little wonky. But the best way to do it is on those working rates, so that's the approach that I took. So, again, this is something that we can bring to the school committee if you think that going in at a higher rate is better. But right now it's based on 6.5%, it's the same for dental. The medical buybacks, I wanted to put that in here because I think it's important to see, that, we originally had the buybacks, I guess the teachers had it, and then they've been phased out, so now it's pretty much just our ESP contract. But you can see that over the years, even with that phase out, it hasn't made a tremendous difference. We still have, you know, around the same, percent. And then, it's just so everyone knows it's 0 right now, cause it gets paid out at the end of the year. So there's nothing to put for fiscal year 25. The pension rates, so I just wanna highlight that right now, the pension rate has gone down for, the teachers, similar to what it did last year. So I have put it in this budget at what the actual rate is that came in from the state, from ERSRI. But based on what happened last year, and taking into account that we were gonna have some savings in our salaries, and then that ended up backfiring, what I wanted to present to the committee is, do we want to present at the actual budget? Do we want to put in, something as a precaution and keep it at what the existing rate is now? It's not a big drop. I think it went from 15.5 to 15.1. But I just do have those concerns on using that number and then having the same thing happen again. And then our workers' comp, so we had a savings. Bob, I know you had brought this up, so we did end up coming in significantly under our original budget for workers' comp because we did have a rebate that then got applied to that premium. But in my conversations with the trust, we're probably looking at an 8% increase because that's pretty standard. You don't normally get a rebate. Same with our life insurance. So I did factor that 8% in this year, just so that we can make sure that we're covered should there be any issues, even though it did come in so much lower. I did the same with our property and liability as well. It's about an 8%.
Have you talked about the health equity, disbursement?
Not yet.
Okay.
Not yet, so not since we spoke, I have not, but our staff accountant and our benefits coordinator, who work very closely together on that, I've asked them to pull some data for me, so we can kind of see not having been here in prior years, I wanted to actually look and see what those invoices look like and see if I can identify, you know, if the rebates were on any of the invoices or anything like that, so I had information prior to speaking to them.
Yeah, I mean, I know it's dependent on all the members' claims and stuff, but, I mean, the market's been pretty friendly for insurance companies too, so, yeah, just any little bit helps.
Jen, you know, and only because this would be something that would have had to go to the school committee if we did, do you have any recollection of, the school committee making decisions on getting any health like rebates back from our health plan?
No, usually it's just presented as at the end, like when it washes out, but other than that, nothing, I haven't heard anything about that.
Okay, and I hadn't
Yes.
seen anything and I didn't know, but I just
Yeah.
wanted to check, okay. Okay.
I think it'd be useful to ask the trust.
Well, and I wanna make sure I have all my ducks in a row before I have a conversation, just so that I can make sure that I'm having an informed conversation with them. So just overall bottom line, you know, what we're anticipating is about a $635,000 increase overall in our benefits as it stands right now, and again, that's with, looking at the pool of our employees that we currently have now. So obviously, as our employees change, as things change, this will, this is gonna alter, but I will say that right now, we are very well staffed, so our open positions is, much smaller than it has been at this point in the past. So the information we're pulling is pretty robust in terms of what we have for positions.
The FICA Medicare line is based on your salary assumptions?
Yes, yes. So the only area where we're really seeing a reduction was in the dental, and that's one of the things I've kind of highlighted for myself, just to double check and make sure, that, and I don't know if it's just because we had a significant number of people who didn't take the dental, or what the reasons are, so I am investigating. Okay. Any other questions on benefits? So, I'm sure you noticed in the document, there's some kind of holding patterns for the salaries. My goal would be to be able to break this out by department. I know that's not something that we've really done in the past, but I just think it would be good for us to be able to identify. It helps with like thinking about per pupil costs and overall what we're doing. So, this, because it's not how our data has been presented, I'm not sure if this is something that's gonna make it to the budget rounds.
Yep.
It might be something that comes after the fact, because the numbers aren't gonna change, it's just gonna be how we're looking at it. Because I wanna make sure that I can tie it into each of the other years and really have some solid data there. So I have this kind of as a holding wish list for myself, but, we'll see we'll see if I get there. So if we go to the Sal Benz tab, so I have a more complete worksheet that goes with this that I'm happy to send to you if you would like it, that has all of the backup for how these numbers are pulled. It's a pretty large document, so I didn't send it, but if you would like it, I'm happy to send it out to you. So this is just taking the data from my rolled up dashboard and putting it in here, so for this meeting, we could have it. But by all means, like I said, if you'd like the complete spreadsheet, I'm happy to send it to you, so that you can see where everything's coming from. So, overall, with our salaries, we're looking at about, between like salaries and benefits and everything, we're looking at about $1.5 million increase from last year's budget. And this does not include any of the requests that you have in the work paper. So, obviously that's gonna be a big discussion item. We have to talk about these are the requests, this is what Dr. Duva and I have been working on, we're still working on, is thinking about how do we address these requests, but also taking into account that we have $1.5 million increase across our salaries and benefits.
The stipends and other salaries is almost $2 million. Is that all stipends?
So let me I have that spreadsheet open just so that if we had questions, I could refer to it, so just bear with me. So let me just pull the dashboard so I can see where it is pulling from. Okay, so it's this other salaries tab. I have so many formulas. So things that are included are sick payouts, vacation payouts. We have some sub-monitors that are in here. We have summer school, well, part of summer school, so stipends that are for summer school and ESY, so the coordinator stipends, things like that. We have, the athletic, so all of the coaches, so all the athletic stipends are in here. We have class overages, stipends for class coverage, and, so there's a large amount of items that roll into that number. And I will say, one of the things, that I addressed in here, and so there's about a $200,000 jump from one year to the next, because we had budgets for, class coverage, and this, I based it off our actual. So our budgets for those categories were around, let's say 30,000, 15,000, and the actuals came in at about 200,000, mostly at the high school. So I addressed those, and I made sure that what I was looking at for budget was tying to actuals, was just, 24 and where we are in 25. But I think, and this is something Dr. Dubin and I talked about, is that I wanna dig deeper, and I wanna find out, like, what were the reasons, particularly at the high school, for that being so high. Was it, because we instituted the new, we had a new, parental leave policy, and maybe that had an impact on it? So I have to do a little, not having been here, I need to do a little bit more
I
digging,
think it's
but.
I know we have to look at it, but it's a combination of, unfortunately, where staff were out for long-term needs for medical reasons or parental leave, which was new, which did increase that sub-line for us.
And I just wanna make sure that I'm also not over budgeting, that it wasn't, a one-off case where we had some situations and something was making it so that number was really high, but the original number actually made sense, because it's a big jump. It's a big jump in that, stipend area, so I really wanna just look closely and make sure that what I'm doing is making sense.
Cause the sub-charges should be not charged to salaries, right? That should be charged, like, this is just for teacher coverage, not for actual, like, contracted subs?
Correct,
Okay.
so contracted subs is in central administration.
Right, okay,
Yes, so this is,
okay.
teacher coverage, and that's why I wanna make sure that it's not a one-off thing, because obviously, if we don't have to have a $200,000 swing in that category.
And last year, we had to have we didn't have the subs to cover, so we were paying the teachers on their off time, their planning time, to be covering the classes.
Yeah, if we could just get a breakout of like what makes up the, of the categories you just mentioned, like what the makeup is there, cause I feel like that sub piece is just kind of weaving its way all the way through.
So I can give you, like I said, I can forward you this document,
Okay.
which takes that one tab and explodes it out.
Okay, yep, that's perfect.
And that other salaries is all the way down, so it lists everything, and it's actually broken out.
Okay, perfect.
So it's a detail of subs for this school or if it's just class coverage, or if it's, extra student pay, whatever it might be.
Okay.
So I will send that to both of you.
Thank you.
So in this document, just with the salaries, just in general, there are some areas that look like they have a little uptick, and some areas that look like they decline. That is mainly because we have, for the administration level, for example, we don't have the COO position anymore. So those salaries and some of that looks like there's a big reduction, but that money has been offset in other areas. So it's just kind of moved around. So it looks like, we have less, even though our costs are going up, but it's just because of how we've changed the positions. Is there, Bob, do you have any specific questions? I don't want, like I said, I don't wanna belabor the overall totals and kind of what we're looking at. I did,
So,
at least for salaries, include grants and food service in this, just.
yeah, I had a general question.
Sure.
Sometimes it's a little easier to look like the enterprise funds, because I think that's ultimately the way the school committee's gonna approve things, is general fund, enterprise fund, grant fund, special revenue fund, so that might be helpful, because like the grants, but the grants are covered by these other stuff, so that's one. And two is just, in addition, just like the top 15 variances by dollar amount, so we're not worried about $5,000 changes, right? We're talking about the 50 to 500K changes, so
Mhm.
the kind of big stuff,
Mhm.
so. But did you budget for breakage at all, or you just factored it into,
So this is an interesting question. We had a very detailed discussion about breakage. So typically, districts, not just NK, but districts would
Right.
budget for breakage. The problem that we are facing right now is breakage is typically, for anyone who doesn't understand, is you're saying, okay, we have a step 10 teacher who's retiring, we're going to then replace that with a step 2 teacher. And so the breakage is the difference, or if you have somebody that starts late in the year. The issue that we're facing now is that we don't really have the ability to bring new teachers in at those lower steps. When we lose a step 10 teacher, we're replacing them with a step 10 teacher because they're qualified and that's who's applying for the positions, and correct me if I'm
Yeah,
wrong,
really,
so.
just over the past year, staffing that's coming in,
Mhm.
they are coming in at higher steps,
Yeah.
right? And you do wanna look at that, you wanna look and say, okay, well, we got these retirements, we got these, it could be cost savings, how can we do that? But it also depends on who's applying for the jobs and who's
Mhm.
coming in. And we do have people that wanna come to North Kingstown, and they are
Mhm.
leaving other places where they've been there for longer periods of time, and they're coming in at higher steps. And when we have our interview committees interview, we say we want you to find the best person.
Yeah.
So, and sometimes, or more times than not, right, it is someone that's coming in with more experience who has, and so they are up higher on their steps.
And especially too, like when you get to the high school level and you have these like specialty classes and they have to have the proper certifications and they have to have the expertise of whatever their subject area is. A lot of times, if someone's coming to a district, they're not a brand new teacher coming out. So, for the purposes of this, I do not have any breakage in here because I'm very hesitant to rely on breakage that may not exist. And I feel like sometimes breakage can be a little bit of a crutch, because you're just assuming that you're gonna have these savings, and then when they don't happen, then what do you do? Then it becomes a crisis. So I have the ability to factor breakage in here, I just have not. I've just gone straight with, this is where we are. But again, this is, I'm happy to see, hear if you have opinions on.
well, again, it's tricky, right?
Mhm.
But it'd
Very
be
tricky.
interesting to see the historical variance, right? So, that's why the budget actuals, right, for some of those, even just the salary line, right,
Mhm.
so.
And because they're two separate documents, it's not represented well in my new budget spreadsheet, because I did create a new document for this, and I wanted to make sure that I had as much information as possible. But if you do look at the budget worksheet on the it's on the salaries. One of these pages I have it in there. Yes, I'm sorry, it's the sum salary page, all the way at the bottom. I do have fiscal year 23 and 24 and year to date. It's just all the way at the bottom. So I do have, and it will represent on that first, sum expenditures? Yeah, sum expenditures report. So I do have the salary piece for each of those years, and I do have the benefits, the same thing, I did roll it up. But, you will have a better indicator of that when I forward that spreadsheet to you. You'll be able to see all that backup data. Okay. I'm gonna go back to this one. Okay, so if we want to move on to the expenditures and we wanna talk about variances, we obviously have the big variance that could potentially exist with the positions that have been requested. And then I also, I would say, aside from things that are happening in the facility, one of the biggest ones that you'll notice in here is with IT. So if we wanna kind of fast forward, especially since we have the IT director here, do we have any questions?
Yep, that would be great.
So,
We will not put you on the spot, Chaz.
I prepared
It's
him,
fine.
I
That's
told
what I'm
him.
here for.
So, this is one which probably looks really different because it used to be such a beastly document and I have consolidated it, but, we did work very closely together on this to make sure that we were capturing everything in here. But again, do have, a very, very detailed spreadsheet of what rolls up into each of these items.
Where's that?
The IT tab? Oh, the detail that rolls up, it's a totally separate spreadsheet. So what
Which
I.
we don't have.
Right, and that's what I was saying, I don't have just that one big UCOA. Now, I will say that this is the only one that does not have the actuals in it yet, and the reason for that is that we have, the person who has done the budget and who had done the numbers prior is no longer with the district. And so how, the current IT director and I pulled the information and how we have it here is very different from how it was. We've also coded things differently. We've decided that things need to be in different areas. It just makes more sense for UCOA purposes. So it was not just I could just pull it from the system and have it match. So I'm actually going UCOA line for UCOA line to get those numbers. So we will have the actuals for this for Tuesday. I just did not complete it for tonight. So those actuals do exist, but that's the reason why for that. But obviously the biggest item is the hardware and equipment purchases, and I've listed that out in your document as to what rolls up into that extra $600,000. And of those, this is not the first time that these items have been brought or will be brought to the school committee for budgeting. At least that's my understanding, again, predates me. But from what we've talked about, we've now kind of reached a fever pitch on some of these items, and we have to replace them, or we're gonna run into an issue where we're not gonna budget for them, and then something's gonna go wrong, and then we're gonna have crisis. So, if you have any specific, like I said, we have Chaz here, who's happy to go into detail. Do you have like specific questions that you want?
Chaz, what is that V-rail replacement alternative thing? Can you just explain what that is?
Yeah, I'll do it again,
Okay,
so
thank
just so
you.
people know.
And I said I was gonna put you on the spot, and then I immediately put you on the spot.
And
No,
then I
that's
put
okay.
you on the spot, yeah, that's
That's
fine.
okay, I really don't mind. Yeah, so the VX rail is what the actual system is that we use. Basically, it's our servers.
Okay, that sounds important,
Yeah, it's the VX rail is basically our big cluster of them. They've been they've been in need of replacement, and we're kind of hitting that real scary part.
So this is cut in prior budget cycle, and you may not know this, I'm just kind of speaking out loud, like, was it cut prior to it coming to the school committee? Cause I don't remember axing that from
That
You may have.
might be
Probably did.
that's a good
Yes.
question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
It is my understanding, and I'm sorry that I'm speaking for you.
No, it's okay.
Again, neither of us
Right,
were ones
no,
that done this
that's
past,
fine.
but it is my understanding that these were cut in prior budget cycles before going to school committee
Gotcha,
presentation.
okay.
So they came in and it was a, nope, not now type of thing.
yep, okay.
What's the life cycle of those?
So the real problem is mostly support on them, but the recommended best practice is no more than 5 years. Is usually where you want to go with. You can get support for longer, and they usually start cranking up a premium once you do that. Usually you end up paying like 2 years per year, essentially past that.
So again, this sounds like an item that should be in fund balance, IT capital, 20% every year, so year 5, you're not having this discussion.
How old is our current one?
It will, hold on, let me double think, is the end of our 5th year.
Okay.
Yeah, the one that we had, we got one that was good enough at the moment, you know. So we've pushed it as far as we can.
And the managed detection and response, $86,000. That's for cybersecurity because of the insurance company.
So that's a recommendation from them.
Okay.
Essentially, to boil that down, it's we're basically paying a cybersecurity analyst as part of our team to watch our stuff.
Okay.
And that is a part of the trust 10 items they want us to have. The date is ambiguous, but they've been pressuring it more and more.
Mhm.
Some of those items.
So as part of like the conversation that kind of expanded from last night about like pooling forces with the town for some of these resources, is that something like, cause that they just had that big issue, like is this something we can piggyback on with them?
Certain things we can't. We are separate, and we have to keep our infrastructure separate.
Okay,
And the way a lot of those licensing happens, it's by an asset count.
Okay.
anyway. So basically, we would be asking whichever company we went with
Yep.
when we put it out to bid or whatever, we'd be asking them to manage our network and assets. And if it happened to be the same one that the town was using, they would still be looking at it as two fully separate
Gotcha.
entities. There
Okay.
isn't a real way to bank on that.
Okay.
Like kind of like the Granicus and other
Yep.
things like that, we can definitely
But
leverage,
not stuff
not
like
this one,
Okay.
unfortunately.
All right. Thank you.
So, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, well, I just, to answer your question about the trust, so it's not as if our coverage will be dropped if we don't have it, but what we've noticed, with the trust each year is that they do have those requirements, and what we had been talking about is that your protection and coverage levels change based on what you have and don't have at the time of an incident. So it might not be something that's impacting us right now, but should we have an incident, if you, and I'm just throwing numbers out there right now, but let's just say we had this prior to the incident, so we're showing this is a best practice, it's something that they recommended we have it, it could be the difference of getting $1 million coverage or $2 million in coverage for whatever the incident might be. So, it's not like we're at risk of losing the trust in any way, but it does aid in the coverage should we have an incident by having these 10 recommended items. It could at some point become something where they say, no, you have to have this, or we can't cover you. And then at that point, then we have to do it. So it's one of those things where, do we do it now so we have it and we're protected, and then it's something that's always in our budget and we know for it and we can account for it, or do we wait till they tell us we have to have it?
Yeah, the list of 10, I won't go through all of it because it's a little more, it's really more than 10 items, but that is there. We need you to start getting these soon. Of the 10, 2 of which we know for a fact that they've already basically, they've really reduced the coverage of a response for local districts that didn't have certain things. And those were in full compliance. Where my goal is to be ahead of that. So that way we're not having to scramble and come in a year where we're saying, no, I'm desperately in need because they're going to cut our remediation. I hope we never get hit with a data breach, obviously,
Right.
but I want to be prepared if that does ever happen.
For expeditious purposes, I don't think it's really our thing to I mean, if you have a question, obviously, but go with everyone. I'm pretty much sure with the superintendent, these are stuff the district needs or stuff. At the macro level, is it correct to say really the problem is that prior budgets supplanted what should have been historically set annual funding in line with the IT strategic plan, and now you're going like, oh, now I have to make it all up again? Is that somewhat a correct statement? Because if I go to ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 and look at like 5.7, 56.7, whatever it is, 09, and go 0, well, every year you need Chromebook replacements, and every year you need this, and every 5 years you need the servers and the access points and stuff. So if you just supplant that, now you're stuck with having to put that back in the general fund. Is that kind of a correct statement?
So unfortunately, I don't know
This is a
exactly.
huge
Yeah.
variance.
So
Yes,
unfortunately,
it is.
unfortunately,
It is a
Nothing
very
really
big variance.
new, per se.
I
Right.
think that a lot of these technology purchases came out of ESSER. Is that what you're asking?
Right,
Yes.
right.
and
They-
so
I believe it was.
now
ESSER
you're trying
two.
to solve it in one shot. And so I guess my macro recommendation for the superintendent to think about when he talks to the school committee is to go, you've got here by a few year phase in using grants, you may want to get out of it by using fund balance phased in to get back into correct budgeting process of going every year based on our IT strategic plan, I need 200,000, whatever it is, for Chromebooks and,
Mhm.
right? And get back to steady state and not try and do it in one shot. That would be my recommendation to think about. The second point would be at the micro level, okay, can we go back and look at, because it looks like, again, from the outside, we got a slew of IT stuff. What's really effective? Like 50 little software systems that everyone's using. What really works? How can we like Canvas has Canvas plagiarism. Can that replace Turnitin? Is it built into the Canvas contract? Would it be less expensive to build in Canvas plagiarism than turn it in? I think at the micro level, which is really not us, but for the superintendent to think that on the short term, well, on the longer term, right? And on the shorter term, to think about phasing in, fixing the issue of, you got a lot of extra money, and maybe some of it was used for structural stuff, and now you're having to figure out how to solve that.
And we've had conversations about, we need 5-10 year cycles put in place, specifically with our larger items, things that would fall under CIP. I've had those conversations with our facilities director, our transportation supervisor, Leslie and I have talked about that. That is something we need to get in place,
And
because we shouldn't be waiting until things come to an end of life, and then all of a sudden, we're trying to look for.
Huge amounts of money.
And I think it's probably something the school committee should have with the asset management to go, like the turf field, like, there's been a historical thing to put 150,000 every year, so whatever, 2030, like, you're not having these discussions. I think it's the same point with buses, with IT, is every year you have to find money to put into a capital allocation or argue with the town and the asset management committee to go the same point, however you solve it, but yeah, I just think for this budget, it's unfair for the taxpayers. Unless the fund balance, I don't know how the audit turned out, so I won't get to, but, you know, to say, let's solve this all in one shot, even though it needs to be solved physically. But resourcing it may be a different strategy than just putting 700,000 in the general fund this year.
I do
Just
think
a
that,
recommendation.
like, I know you know we haven't had a finance director, so I think now that we have one, I'm confident that something like that will be put together, and our director of facilities also, so, you know, I hope that this is the last year that we don't have a plan to compare it against. It just unfortunately has coincided with the end of the grant funding at the same time, unfortunately. But I hear what you're saying, Bob.
Well, right, it's just
Yep.
recommending
Yep.
you
Nope.
think of options,
Yep.
as opposed to just
Nope.
solving it with the general fund this year.
And it is certainly something that we can discuss, you know, if we do want to think about using fund balance for some of it, but what I also don't wanna have is then have the similar problem where we use fund balance, and then when the next cycle of Chromebooks comes around and we have to replace that, then we're in the same boat, and then what if we don't have fund balance to pull from? So I don't wanna, you know.
Well, right, that's a conversation that should have been had 3 years ago,
Mhm.
when a decision was made to use ESSER two funds to buy it all outright. So that's a moot point now. I totally understand your point, but I guess my thing is, consider, right, getting your way out of it to, you're right, where you're not using fund balance at all. You're in a steady state level of IT replacement, and you're on a prorated
And if we look at it and
budgeting.
say we reappropriate what's going in that fund balance, look at the categories we have, and every year when there's a surplus, we can say, okay, certain percentages are
Yeah,
going
we
into these
haven't done that in
categories.
years, but I think
Right, so
having.
then it's not just like, for example, some of the things that I've been part of since I came here, we've had to go to the school committee and say, we just need to use the fund balance for it. I think that's what we're concerned about.
Right.
But if we have it set within the categories of what that fund balance each year is going to be used for, and I think, you know, the turf field, right, that's in there.
Yeah.
That's something
Yeah.
that's
The-
happening.
And I
Some
think
of the
that's
other
something that we
facility
can
stuff,
get
we
back
put it in,
to.
and then every year,
Yeah.
making sure we.
Well, the
But-
new buses are a perfect example of that, the new, we put in, and there was money allocated so that when the opportunity came and we could buy 2 new buses, we had the funds to be able to do it and not have to lose out on that opportunity. So,
And if we decide to put a line in there for transportation, then every year, as we have a surplus, we can say, okay, we can put in whatever that variable will be each year.
And I think now that we have some visibility, and I think just even seeing this, whether or not we end up funding it, like, we know it's out there somewhere, right?
Mhm.
Like, instead of not even, when it doesn't even come up to the school committee, like, to get cut, like, and then you come back next year, not you, but it's like, what? Why did we even talk about this last year, right? So at
Yeah.
least this way, we can, like, know that these things are out there and can plan.
And I'll reiterate this too at the school committee as well, like I know, so part of the, like that 5-year plan, I mean, part of the thing I'm doing right now is I'm reworking our 5-year plan to be far more squished. I also don't like this, because that's it should be far more evenly spread out amongst every year. So I have a couple things that we can push back a year, which isn't on here because I didn't, like, I really should be asking, but we can make it another year and we can be in support and not have a problem, because I do want to have that way more evened out, way more normalized
Right,
than what it currently is.
No, that's great, thanks, Jess.
And that is one of the main reasons why I always provide a narrative with it for what you're saying, is that it might not make it to Tuesday, like, but I want this, everything that's on here will go to school committee.
Mhm.
So this document, and then if we start removing things, below it, it will say, cut at superintendent level,
Yep.
cut at superintendent level, so that you can say, hey, can we revisit this? I
Right.
really think this is a priority. Because I think it is important to know what's been pushed off however
Mhm.
many years, because then when you do reach that critical time where you have to replace it, you understand why you let it go so far.
Right,
Um,
right, and everybody was like in on the, like, in on the conversation.
It's not
Yeah.
a surprise.
Right, yeah, yeah.
Do you have, and it may not be for us, but linked to the superintendent's discretion, there used to be a Excel matrix with like, okay, it's this year, here's the grades that are being replaced Chromebook, here's the number of
That's in
admin
the-
offices. Like,
It is on our website.
okay,
I have the one that's on our website is what was officially put in place. The one that I have right now is a revised one, but that is still in place. I should put the current one
just-
that's up there.
okay.
But yes, we are working under what was approved by the technology committee as well. It's pretty much all of this. We just had a technology committee meeting a couple weeks ago, and part of it was that. How do we keep up with that rollout? The answer is we aren't, but we're gonna try to get as close as possible. But yes, that is still there, and we'll make that. But I think it is still right on our technology page right now. Still, if you go to it, I'm gonna check that as I'm saying that to make sure.
The other thing too, just to note that's in here, is our school mobile app.
I saw that,
So we're looking for something different.
okay.
So I mean, we still have to fund it. I know it says,
But
no
it's
longer
still
investing
in
in
there as
that,
a line item.
but
Okay.
we will be looking for something else. And I did talk to the attorney about like what it is, and he said we just have to make sure we have something.
Okay, yeah,
But
that was
we
one
need
of my
something that's
questions,
going
thank
to
you.
be-
Okay,
So we've-
okay, yeah, no, I know there were a lot of problems with that.
And that, like I said,
And
I
that's
wanted
coming.
that note to be in there that if you didn't see it in that specific thing, if we gave you more detailed stuff, but that the line item is in his budget for that. There's also still the part of our school that we are using, which is the
Facility
facility scheduling and everything,
Yeah.
so there are pieces that are still in there.
The thing for the whistleblower, the town, I thought, just like kiboshed their,
So they did, so this was the first year, 2025 was the first year we had to pay for it. So
Okay.
we had never done it before, the town always absorbed it. And then, it came out in 2025 that they thought it needed to be split. So we did, we managed to, find some funds and we moved a few things around so that we could fund it. And then, I would say at the last audit committee meeting, actually, they
Yeah.
had decided that they've redone it, and I don't wanna misspeak about what they've done, but I know they have changed it, and so it's quite possible that that is not gonna be needed.
yeah, I feel like based on what I observed in the meetings is that they have eliminated the requirement from, however it is.
It's no longer a policy, it's now a procedure.
No, it's
So
now a policy, it's not an ordinance or something like that.
Yes,
So
I think that's
basically,
it.
they're not using this anymore.
I
Yeah.
don't believe so, but
Okay.
again, I didn't wanna be caught
Yeah,
off,
no.
so it's in there, but if the town says no, in fact, we can eliminate it, it's an easy budget cut, and
And
it can go.
that's actually, we should get some type of formal notification from them on that,
Mhm.
because we have to make sure we're covered on our end, yeah. I have that in my
Okay.
tickler file, but while we're talking about it.
Again, not for this budget, just a suggestion maybe it's for the technology committee, whatever. I think you should be thinking about how you can use AI to supplant some things.
Agreed.
ChatGPT, say what you will, but solves a lot of problems sometimes.
Do you have any suggestions? I know that was a question that you forwarded.
I do, but I don't think it's for here, because it's not germane to the 26 budget, but I think it's just a focus area that the district should be thinking about, which you probably already are, but I'm just verbalizing it from my perspective as a community member.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we are very close pulse on how AI can help us, for sure. Yeah, definitely on the forefront of the mind.
Do we have any other questions with regard to IT, or can we have that poor Chaz off the hook now?
I can, I really don't mind,
Thanks, Chaz.
of course.
So one thing, Jen, I just wanted to point out, because I knew you asked this in an email and I didn't get a chance to respond, but while I'm thinking of it, you asked about the high school budget
Yes.
and how it doesn't look much different. So, when I had been talking earlier about similar with the IT and about how things had been put in different places, what I did is I moved in its entirety the dual enrollment
Okay.
from curriculum,
Okay.
and I moved it here, so I kept the prior years in there so that you could see.
I gotcha.
I
Okay.
wanted you to be able to see how
What
it's
the
changed
history
over
was.
the years,
Okay,
what the
that
history
makes
was, and
sense.
not have to jump back and forth between budget pages.
Okay.
So I moved that and the testing assessments, so overall, the high school budget was, in prior years, is going to look inflated.
Gotcha. So if I looked at the line for it in the other file, it would be lower than what it
Yes.
appears here. I gotcha.
Correct,
Okay.
and what I can
that
do
makes
is,
sense.
I have the other budget, you know, I can
No,
look
no,
at
no,
it
that
and say,
that makes sense. I just needed to understand. I'm like, I knew it was in there because you said it was there. I just couldn't like wrap my head around why I couldn't see it.
So, do you have any specific questions that you want me to address while, I'm happy to go through if you have specific things, again, or I can keep talking about variances. I wanna make sure that if there's certain things that you'd like answered now, prior to Tuesday, that we cover them, if you think that they're important to talk about and address prior to what gets rolled out.
So the one thing that I noticed, I do have a few, but one that stood out in the list of like potential new positions, which I understand are not included in the salary numbers in here.
They are not.
Okay, none of them, okay.
None of them.
But I noticed that all the schools are represented except Quid.
So you know how I arrived at here.
Yep.
So with every budget discussion, so I sent out a document to all of the department heads with, and I said, this is your opportunity to ask for things that you need, what you have, what could be better. And not just on your budget items, I wanted to know staffing considerations, I wanted to know other departmental issues, things that are on the horizon. So, for some schools, it was staffing, this is what came, this is what they wanted. I will say that, for Quid, and I can pull up their actual thing and I can look at the notes right now. And I want to do that so that I'm making sure I'm relaying the right information, but there were things outside of staffing that they thought were more important because they do have, they do get staffing because of the
Yep,
grants.
yep.
They have more
I know they have
full-time
the
positions
additional-
than the
yes.
others. I mean,
And she was very aware of that
Mhm.
and really wanted to think about, if we're talking about how district money can be spent, that they have the benefit of different grants and having those positions from those grants there where there were other things that they needed.
Okay.
That maybe made more sense for them.
Okay,
So-
I just wanna make sure that like, that they were, not that I thought they were excluded from the conversation, but it was glaring that there was no staffing needs here.
and a lot of it is special education.
Yep.
So that's in coordination with, student services and then, with each of the schools based on the programs and the needs. And then the schools that did ask for staffing that, not necessarily is special education, but more the MTSS, is because they don't have like the full-time equivalent of those positions like Quinessa does.
Yep.
So they were asking for like slight increases, so they got to, instead of like 2 days a week, 3 days a week.
Yeah, no, I saw that. Where,
So based on what she yesterday told me, so she said the amount of staffing that is allocated to her school is sufficient, and she feels, but she needs to make sure that she's fully staffed. So it was not asking for new positions, it was doing everything that we could as a district to make sure that all of her open positions were
okay,
staffed.
that's an important point, okay,
Yes,
thank you.
and so,
Okay.
and she said, she has, the availability of 8 TAs, she needs to have all 8 TAs staffed, because when she doesn't, she's got teachers that are filling in and doing different things, so it wasn't about adding people,
It was making sure there were
that
bodies
there
in
were
those
bu-
positions, okay.
Yes,
Okay.
and that she does have those, because we use substitutes for different things, so it's not, that she's feeling, that things aren't covered, it's just, would be easier for them to be covered if they had full-time staffed
Right.
positions.
Right.
And so, but nothing new that needed to be added. And just to put in perspective, the things that they were asking for was like the music teacher had some, they need some furniture and fixtures, and that was more of a priority.
Yep,
then, bodies, because she felt that was sufficient.
That makes sense. The mental health positions that are listed on here, and I don't need it today, but I would like to know, like, from a district standpoint, like, where we're at in terms of, like, bodies and buildings, and how that compares, like, total students to, like, the recommended ratios. I know we've been trying to, like, you know, do better each year, but seeing that it looks like, 2 of the schools have requested increases in those positions. I'm just wondering from a district standpoint where we're at. So if you could put that together, that would be great. And the psychologist that's noted as a new position for PPS at the high school, is that part of the special ed programming, or is that for?
No, that would be more for MTSS supports to be able to be helping with services for other students, right, general education students as well.
Okay.
Well, it's obviously difficult for me to look at this and go, I think the two general comments is obviously racking and stacking whatever prioritization, right, you feel is appropriate to bring to the school committee. But the second part is, I think it needs to compete against ESSER funded stuff that got carried over. I mean, ESSER in general is supposed to be makeup or to help districts get right in terms of, capital items like better ventilation and stuff. I don't really think the intent was to roll over $1 million or more in structural positions. So I honestly think some of those things and positions that were grant funded in the past should compete against these.
So
Not be assumed that they should carry over, because that was never the intent on some of these positions, unless they've been proven to be effective,
Right.
which.
If we look down and do a breakdown of what positions the district had put in the ESSER grants, they were intervention positions to help close gaps, which are still needed. Some of the mental health support as well. So they weren't positions that were not essential to say, that, okay, had it for a year, you don't need it anymore. They were specific to be servicing students academically or for mental health reasons.
Right, I don't disagree. I guess my
I
point
think
is
it's just the way
going,
at the time, in the
my point is
past,
going-
how the district used the funding in the grant to bring those positions in.
right, I guess my general point is going, again, I'll go back to until the state fixes the massive variation in the state aid funding formula, which is another thing our General Assembly legislature should be. I would hope that the town and school committee would ask them to work on, because it's crazy to live in fear that you're gonna get a 10% cut, even if your enrollment is stable, just because it's 3 years after evaluation year and you hit a market boom. But that aside, at some point, I think you have to say, like, it can't be a blank check, right? I know there's a 4% in total, but if that's more focus of where the district needs to put resources, then it's gotta find other stuff that's just less important.
And we understand that's the task that we're gonna be going through and looking to see what recommendations we be bringing to school committee of the priorities. Like, we need A more than we need B. Tough decisions that have to be discussed and made at this point, because if we're going to add these 16.3 FTEs, we're talking about $1.5 million?
$1.7 million.
$1.7 million.
And-
Where is $1.7 million coming from? But when you look at some of these requests, even of these requests, we gotta prioritize, because some of them are tied to special education programming, which we're gonna have to have.
That was one of the questions that I had on the thing that you presented last night. It said that our special ed population is 22.8%. Like RIDE, like the last data that they had was 13.9%. That's a huge bump up in our district. Is that being seen across the state, or is it specific
I
to
can
us?
look into that. I don't know exactly how we're comparing right now to other districts, but I'll look
Yeah,
into
and I'm
that.
less interested in the number as in the increase, like year to year, because like last year, the requests were very heavy for special ed programming. This year, the requests are very heavy for special
I
ed
think what we're
programming.
seeing, and Dr. Sandra and I had these conversations, and Leslie was part of it today, is that there were programs in place years ago that then were taken away, things were changed, models were changed, and we're seeing that those programs that have the continuums should have been there. And now we're trying to go back and say it's needed. If you look at the needs of the students and the population, and what type of services they need, the supports, we need those programs in place for them. We're also trying to plan ahead based on looking at the populations that are coming up from preschool as well, and making sure that we have those programs in place.
Yeah,
So
I would be
it's
interested.
on both sides, right? So it's not just looking at the early childhood, it's elementary to middle school too.
Yeah.
And we even know, like even at the high school level, you know, we have the recognition there for that transition program. We don't know if that's gonna be possible to put in place. It would be something that would be beneficial for our students, at that age, that transition age, if we can put it in place.
The other thing that I had was, you know, we have added like some of the interventionist positions and things like that, and you know, they were added to you know, support students in getting an increase, and I'm not sure that we've actually realized those goals. So I would like to know, like, in terms of like what type of, you know, where have we seen those effects? Like, have those, you know, have we seen tangible effects from that to the extent that we can measure it? And like, how much do these positions that are adding and the positions that are in the budget, to go to Aaron's point last night, like align with what has been identified as our strategic goals? Because it's not a huge overlap, or it's a very skewed overlap, maybe is the best way of putting it. Do we have a list of like the number of LTEs that we've had like in prior years? Like, I know you had like the last two in here, but I'd be interested in seeing
What, I'm sorry, when you say LTE?
whatever the FTEs.
Oh, FTEs.
Yeah.
And-
Sorry, letters to the
No,
editor.
that's okay. No,
Too
no,
many
that's all right.
acronyms.
I knew it.
But I think the more useful way of presenting it is like a quad matrix of general fund, benefits eligible. Because an FTE is not an FTE, right? I mean, in terms of
Well-
just kind of like,
You
You
could,
can't
because
look
you
at
could
the
have a point
insurance.
two, you could have a point four,
Well-
most of our employees though, those point positions are point at one location, but they combined are one FTE, it's just how they're divided out for your code purposes, but I understand what you're saying, like, where's, that's the most impact that you're gonna have.
well, right,
On the
it's,
budget
it's
is-
sort of like, again, with insurance, just going, well, it goes up 6%, but it may or may not, because family plan enough, right, if everyone took a single plan, that would be, I think it's really useful to look at your FTE differentials by grant, non-grant, and benefits eligible, not benefits eligible, right? Because that's just a different cost structure for them,
I can,
and look at that growth.
I can certainly look at how to break that out, so, in
Yeah, we don't have to debate it here, I can.
No, and we can certainly talk about that, so in that, in this budget document that I sent, if you go all the way to the end,
Right.
there is an actual, appendix document that is an FTE comparison.
Oh, I didn't see that.
I
slide.
haven't, because it doesn't have the data in it yet, cause we're still working through the FTE part, so that's when I was like, you know, because all of my FTEs are housed in a totally separate document, so
Okay.
it doesn't feed into here, but I've created this space so that I can do it by location and say, this is our administrators, these are certified, non-certified, these are other, I'm in a school committee in there, so that we can compare it year over year, so we can look at 2004 to 2005 to 2006, I can add as many years
Okay.
as I'm able to get, but with the salary data, my hope is to have that in here, so we actually do have that, like a comparison, and we can kind of see, you know, are we noticing it in one particular place where we seem to have a lot of growth? Is it, you know, one particular school? Is it just overall, is it mostly in
Right.
special ed? And I can certainly see if I can break this out from, you know, regular ed to
Special
ed
ed.
and things like that.
That would be great.
So this is kind of another wish list of mine, of
Yep.
things that I would like to do as I'm thinking down the road for us in budget for future
Next
years.
year, yeah.
What do we wanna have, what are the types of information that we wanna capture, and I'm trying to
Yep.
build it now, so that I can gather that information.
Repopulate it,
Yeah.
that's great. And I like what you said about like having preschool as its own budget, I think that is, or its own segment, like I
Mhm.
think that's important to see.
And I have
Yeah,
kind
I
of,
think you should almost treat it like an enterprise fund. Now,
So-
I know
So
it's
we were
not
talking
thing,
about that, just kind of,
but it
thinking
helps
of-
align the revenue, the,
well, it's a little bit tricky because with an enterprise fund, you have to be able to fully fund it within that
Right.
enterprise
I'm
fund.
not
So you-
sure that we.
like an
would-
enterprise fund.
Okay,
See what I'm
because
saying?
if we
I
did
mean,
that,
you
I
could
mean, we'd
do-
have to be able to provide staffing in there, and that gets a little
That you could do,
complicated.
you could do a P&L, but not quite like the cafeteria fund or the IT computer, that. But I think you're right, looking at it as a independent activity is useful.
And I think right now, it all, and it's not, for purposes of this budget, making it have its own little budget section, its own department is not gonna change it drastically because we're still gonna have the curriculum put in the curriculum line. But I do think it's important, I mean, right now, the only thing that's been identified for preschool in our other budgets is just their supplies line.
Yeah.
It's like a $2,000 supply line, and I just don't think that's indicative of what it
No,
costs to
I
run the
don't-
program, whether it be including the curriculum, the
I
training.
don't even think $2,000 is enough to.
And it's not,
go towards that.
if I take my figures that what it costs per preschool child, and I look at how many children in the program and what they should have, their supplies line should be more like 4,300. So I just think it has gotten a little muddled. I'd love to be able to just, even if it only has 5 lines, just to be able to see
Yeah, just something
where our
that
dollars go.
separates it out, yeah.
And then if the program does in fact grow and we're doing more, I think it's just a good way for us to make sure that it's aligning with those.
Yeah, no, I think, especially because since it lives at an elementary school, like that, it's easier to compare apples to apples if you can pull that out of the elementary school that it's in, you know what I mean? Because obviously there's additional things for preschool that the other schools don't have.
I will, just to that point though, I do wanna kind of, if we're thinking about having the preschool, in its own building, what won't happen probably is a reduction in the current elementary school supply line.
Okay.
Because those classrooms will be filled by other students
Oh,
coming in.
the students, right.
So the preschool's going out,
Yeah, no.
but other students are coming
Yep,
in, so
that makes sense.
their stuff's gonna have to remain the same, and it's gonna have
And
to
also-
be in addition to.
If we go with the recommendation of moving the preschool to DA, that will now be considered a school of its own.
It will be a school of its
Okay.
own, and that will also
Because of having
change.
the preschool, so now you have a separate coding for that.
Yeah.
Yes, and I think it's important to know that everything that we've been coding for the DA will now change. So it is going to change how things are represented
Everything, yeah.
in our budget.
Yep.
So then comparing those apples to apples moving forward,
Be a
we just
little-
have to keep that in mind
Yep,
because right now, because it's not listed as a school, it is allocated out to the home school for that
Homeschools,
child.
yep.
So that will change.
On the first page, was it, on the line that was other district expenses, $85,000 budget, $8,000 year to date, what populates that stuff?
That's just the other. It is mostly travel, employee travel, and,
Okay. Oh, EE travel, okay.
travel and, furniture and fixtures.
Okay,
So we were, that line item was rolled up into, in prior budgets, it was kind of all rolled into, I think the part was in the fiscal budget and part was in the superintendent budget. And it wasn't allocated out, and it was just kind of a number that existed, and that's what we used.
Where is that? What?
it's
sheet
on
is it?
this one at the
The
very,
first.
the summary page, it's the very last expenses line.
So a lot of the, what I have seen, just in the short time that I have been here, is that a lot of that comes in like from February on. So as of January, they change, we get all of the travel expenses that come up from the teachers that are doing their
Gotcha.
mileage, they put them in buckets.
Okay,
So they.
it comes in fits and
And
starts.
I
yeah.
noticed, just from when I had started here, that all of a sudden at the end of the year, everyone was like, we have to put all of our expenses in, and it comes in. So I had reached out to the staff and I had said, okay, moving forward, you have 30 days. You
Yep.
need to get your stuff in within 30 days, and they have definitely, it's a little bit of a learning curve, but people are doing really well. The flip side of that is now I have to keep up with being timely
Right.
in doing those reimbursements. I have not.
Okay,
So
no, that's fine. It
that-
just, it stuck out as a really big,
And I kept the budget as close to, based on prior spend and what we had done, but I do think there might be some wiggle room here for us to reduce that.
Okay.
I really do.
Um,
But based on, I don't wanna shortchange ourselves and then not have it and then need it, because I'm still learning all of the different things, like going through a full cycle. I haven't been through a full year yet, And so I wanna make sure that there aren't stuff that all of a sudden is gonna get,
Come in on the last
come
moment.
into the
Right,
last,
right,
the
right.
last moment,
No,
and
that
then
makes sense.
we're
That
not gonna
makes
have it.
sense.
So I did keep that, but that's why there's that discrepancy with what we've had year to date.
I know we were trying to talk about variances as well, so I'm just looking
Yep.
at that as we go. So an increase that's on here, under 5641 for textbooks for social studies, that I
Yes.
believe is because that is the next curriculum that we need to
Yep.
update.
Yep, we
Yes.
did the high school, right, and now we gotta do the middle school.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So if, as we're looking at what's in here and things we may need to consider or not consider, that is something that we are proposing for next year.
Is the high quality curriculum options out yet, Rod?
For social studies, so it's a framework that they gave us for social studies. The science is not out yet,
Yeah, so
but for social studies, basically, they gave you a framework of what you need to teach, and then you have a choice of what curriculum you're bringing in for that. It's not based on how it was done prior with the math and the ELA and how they're doing science now.
This may be in the fund balance notional allocation, but is the NK high school accreditation at 26, the site visit?
The,
Actual NEAS site visit?
yes,
So is that,
we should
I think it
So-
was
Go back and look at
budgeted
the high
fund
school.
balance, but,
No,
Cause
we had a budget for it this
Yeah.
year in fiscal year 25, cause they actually just were on site, and so we,
oh, they actually had the site visit?
they had a site visit already, it happened.
yeah, we had one,
They-
but I don't,
Cause I
We
don't
haven't
think
had
the
the full
community
event.
got notice, right? There's usually a community opportunity to talk to NEAS?
I don't think it was the full
no,
site
this,
visit.
Right.
no, we're in the process, so
Right.
it was a very small site visit that
Yes.
happened. And there were people there were parents that were part of that came into it for some of the interview, but we're within that cycle right now. So, but there wasn't anything.
We're like 6 or 7 people descend upon the high school for 3 days, that visit? Or is that still a thing?
So our next
This-
large
there was
visit like
only-
that will be 2027.
Okay,
Yeah, I was gonna say,
2027.
this was
Got it.
only
So,
like,
right,
Right.
there might have been.
no, this was
three
small, and it was
Still good
budgeted.
to, still good to put in
Yeah.
fund balance, right?
So,
10K or something to placeholder
So
for.
there's always, so we have fees that pay to NEASC every year, so those are always
Right,
budgeted
that
here.
doesn't cover the site visit.
Right, and then the site visit, so the way it's broken up, at least here, is the things that apply to it, so there's supplies and materials, there's accreditation materials, there's catering and things, because you have to pay for their hotel and
Right.
food when they're here, so it's broken up into a variety of line items, and what I have noticed is, in most cases, there has been some funding that has been left in that, regardless of whether or not. Now, this year, in conversations with the high school principal, she said if we have to cut things, we can cut it, because they're not coming again till 2027, and what we already had, they've already done and been here, so we have a year where if we needed to, but again,
But that
I don't
would
wanna
make sense to
then
me
have
as
to put it
another
back.
item just to put in fund balance. It's a 10-year cycle, so, but I'll leave that for when you have a discussion. But, okay, but it's not in 26, that's the
No.
immediate point.
Do we have, Jen, do you have any other specific?
The subs, like the
Yes.
long-term subs and the overages and like what we're paying in terms of like actually what we're paying our subs versus what the other districts are getting paid
Sure.
and.
So did you, and again, I might not have been, I didn't give a lot of detail when I sent my email last night, so there is a tab in the yellow all the way at the end that says substitutes,
Yes.
and in there it does have what other districts are paying, so there is that list.
Yeah, and that's why we are still, like, we had raised our rates before, but we still like are well below the average.
Yes,
And I wonder how much that plays into our ability to.
it absolutely does.
Right.
And so this was something I talked to with the director of HR, so she and I had conversations about this. She actually did a lot of the research and provided this for the other districts. She gathered the information from the other districts so that we could put it together. And it is an increase. Obviously, it's something that we have to consider, but when you look at, if you're looking at this document and you're looking at what, just the long-term sub piece, so ESS provided us with
Yep.
what we had spent year to date, and I used that to project out of what, if we're at this pace, what's it gonna look like for the end of the year, and then what would our increase be? It obviously, it's not a small number, it's
Mhm.
not a large number, but it's, you know, in the hundreds of thousands, if we're looking at a full year and we're raising it to 200. But the important thing is having a teacher in the classrooms. So if we have somebody out, from the finance perspective, I think that is an important cost to have. It means we're gonna have more coverage, and that class is gonna have a certified teacher in that classroom, because we're gonna get that teacher at that rate.
Right.
At moving up to 200, as opposed to keeping it at the 150.
And is
right
this,
now.
are these calculations based on the 200 or the 165?
200.
Okay.
So I based off of, so if you look at like my projected for 25, what the long-term rate would be, and then a 2% increase, which is what we anticipate, and then that is the number that feeds into what I have in the budget in central
Okay.
admin.
Okay.
And I will double check just to make sure that everything is
Okay,
tying out, but
yeah.
my intent is to do it at that rate, because I do think that it's important when we're looking at our fill rate. In order to improve that, we need to do
Yeah,
this.
especially if we're paying like all that overage to the teachers to cover the classes
Mhm.
and, yeah, okay.
But on the flip side, that's the supply side. I think if you just look at the general increase in the substitute line, both long-term and short-term, I mean, it, to me, speaks to, like, can we do some research on why it's growing so fast?
Yeah.
Like,
Well, we think we know why.
okay, well, I mean, then, because it's growing at a rate that's gonna start eating up other stuff at some point. I mean, I know we focus on chronic absenteeism for students, but, you know, there's the other dashboard where I doesn't want to put on public, so. But, okay,
And we
but if
look
you're,
at,
if you,
but we do look at that, we track,
Mhm.
when I say track in a, I don't mean, we do look at, I don't know what teachers think about like tracking every little move they make, but like looking at who's out for long periods of time. We don't have instances where we have teachers that are chronically absent because they're just not coming in. Our situations with teachers that are out on long leaves with reasons that support those leaves, either contractually or because of other reasons.
right, and my point is not to say there's a problem there, it's to say if it's like student emotional, well-being is becoming more important. If this is a new norm, then something else has to give.
Right.
The two other specific questions, well, three, I lied. I noticed that you put the note in about the, PE supplies increase at Woodford Middle School.
Yes.
I have to ask, can they last until we get the new school? Like you said, it was a substantial increase. Sorry, Dave.
No, it's okay. Substantial increase in terms of the Woodford Middle School budget.
Okay,
In terms of not $100,000,
Okay.
we're talking like $5,000 or $6,000.
okay.
We're talking significantly small amount of money in the grand scheme
In the
of
scheme of theirs, okay.
in the
yeah,
scheme of
okay.
theirs, if
Okay.
you're looking at it, so I know that may seem trivial to put in these notes, but
No,
when it's
no, no,
when it's a
it's-
specific ask where a principal is saying to me, listen, they're using, he gave the example, which I thought was, like, they have this one game that they play, and I guess the handles come off all the time, and he was like, we went to go buy them, and we realized that these were bought like 22 years ago or something, and he's like, we can't find them now because it's 22 years old. So he's like, I think it's time that we need stuff. So I agreed, and when I talk about it, it's like $1,500 difference.
Okay.
But it's substantial in terms of their budget.
But not in
But
terms
not
of.
our
And
budget,
if you look at
no.
a percentage increase too.
It's
Yeah.
similar
There's no
at the
reason.
middle schools.
Best look at the percent,
Yeah.
look at the.
Just
total.
in my mind, I'm like, we shouldn't be funneling money
No.
into, but.
No furniture fixtures, no anything, but
Yeah.
so the two things that it works out to is, so the athletics department also asked for, they need all new uniforms
Yep.
for the middle school, same thing.
Yep.
They're mismatched together, it's, we wanna have that uniformity, we want equity, we want them to have all the same things, so it's an increase, I think it's $5,000 in uniforms, and another $15,000 to $2,000 for the PE stuff, but it will make a world of difference
Of course
for
it
that
will,
particular
yeah.
school and that
Yeah.
budget, so.
Okay, thank you for that. What was my other question? I lost it. I couldn't help but notice under the coaching stipends that there was a note, there were extra for football.
Yes, and, so I have talked about this many times, but I did wanna put it in there because it was something that was approved prior to me.
Okay.
And I don't know at what level it was approved at, but that's why I wanted it in there, and that, so that everybody knew it wasn't just something that was being asked for. It was previously discussed and they had talked about, so there are, with the size of our program, there are sometimes needs for additional coaches for different things, but not a full level coach.
Yep.
And so the discussion was that when that was needed, we would have them, and there were like certain levels and certain rates. The stipends for them are significantly smaller than you would get for a coach, and it's an as needed, based on the size of the team and the size of the program. And I don't know if you can speak to that a little bit better.
It's not that we're increasing what they have had in the past.
No,
No,
what
It
caught
was
my eye
paid
was, cause
differently
we
and
had
it wasn't
had
in the
a
budget.
request and we had had a conversation at the school committee level from, coaches from other teams who had asked for additional funding to fund additional coaching positions, and
When was that?
you were here. And it was like, we were told, no, each team gets a coach, and then they get something else. And so to see that there are actually, is a team out there that has more than that,
So it's last year's budget? Or,
Yeah, and
prior to
my
that.
understanding was that this was
I'm just
something,
remembering what we had.
last year, I
Okay.
can dig it out, yeah.
and we can talk about it
Yeah.
more. So my understanding was that this was something that had been approved, and it just had not been budgeted for, and I wanted to make sure that it was budgeted for, so that,
Yeah, this
because
isn't,
we're paying them, I wanna
right,
make sure
this
that it's
isn't,
recognized.
we're not adding coaches.
No,
to
no,
what
no,
they
no, I'm
had.
not, I'm
They were
not,
being
no, I'm
paid
not,
in
I'm
a
not
way
suggesting that you're
we
adding it, I
stopped.
just, it caught my eye because when we had discussed this before,
Mhm.
this never came up in conversation. We were told that there was just one coach and one, and I think I even asked, even for football, who's got a bazillion people, and I was like, I was told, yes, they're only being paid just like everybody else, and that seems not to be
Well,
the case.
isn't part of the issue historically is that teams will fundraise, right, and pay for other coaches in non-general funds, which I always
They've been
found
told they can't do that
I
anymore.
always found that
Yeah.
problematic, so good you
Yeah.
fixed that.
And that's what was happening, were
And-
other funds being
Yeah.
But
funneled into that.
Maybe the point might be is to, just revisit size of teams, scope
Yeah,
of
and what's
coverage.
needed, that's,
Right.
yeah.
And by all means, like, by me bringing this, I certainly don't wanna penalize
No,
the
no, no,
football
and
team
it's,
in
I'm
any
not
way
putting
or
on
anything
football,
like
it's
that.
just, we had
Yeah.
specifically addressed the issue for that reason, to make sure that there was a process to ensure that there was like appropriate coaching for each
Mhm.
team that they needed to support the program. And it was a flat, nope, everybody gets one, and so, but they don't, so that's just something I'd like to follow up on separately.
Okay, and we can certainly do that, and like I said, I had noticed it, because I was like, why is this not adding up, and when I was looking
Yeah,
at.
we can we can look at it because every team like has a head coach and some have like an assistant.
Right.
Football, there's a head coach and an assistant, but then there's like coaches for other
Like special teams or
things, not like a
something,
head coach, but.
No,
like
I know, yeah,
Yeah.
you've got the
I think it's like
linebacker and the
kid-
offensive line, and you got the,
Yeah.
I mean, I get all that, but that did not come up in the course of the conversation around providing stipends for additional coaches for other teams, so. But not the point of today, but that caught my eye.
What happens to the summer camp enterprise fund surpluses?
Yeah. So the summer camps that we have, because we looked at that a few
Mhm.
weeks ago,
Mhm.
those funds are in there. They're only used for the summer camp. They don't get we're not able to give them to, it's like, you have a summer camp for basketball. The funds that come in are strictly just for the summer camp. They can't then be
So you
allocated out for
reappropriate
the
back to the camp?
basketball team.
It
It's
gets-
only at the camp
It's
level.
only used for the camp. So-
Because I honestly think that's something you should think about, which is the same thing that, and I don't know if it still exists, but the 15% capital fee
Mhm.
for, use of facilities,
Right.
maybe there should be a portion that goes to athletic capital
We,
from summer camp,
That's
because,
the
had that
exact conversation we were having.
because I just see, like, you want 10 grand for the,
Mhm.
like, that's a fund balance item, but it could come from summer camp.
Or athletic
Capital
date
fee.
receipts, which
Mhm.
has a lot of money in it currently.
And that was the conversation, so part of this,
Yep.
all we're talking about now came out of that meeting was, if they don't need it, because the camp funds itself every year, so that surplus, is it just sitting there, how could it be better used, is it something where we reappropriate it back? so that it can go to something that we maybe couldn't normally fund in the general fund budget. So that, it's absolutely something that we're
I
looking
think
into.
you're careful of saying if they need it, cause they'll find a way to need it,
Oh,
right?
of course they'll find a
I
way.
would say it's just the cost of doing business is, if you're running a summer camp using district athletic facilities, you are giving money back to the district to maintain those facilities.
That is the exact
Yeah.
conversation, is if those summer camps are using the soccer nets and all the cones and the flags and the things like that, you know, how do we make sure that then those items are being maintained and not being a drain on our general fund budget? That's exactly what we were discussing.
And then just like we had asked at the meeting the other night, just a list of enrollment at charter schools and CTEs and transportation costs to those, please. And have we ever, this is weird, I just noticed that it's not a lot, but it looks like we're spending less on library books this year than we have other years. Any idea why?
I don't know, you know, again, past years, but for me, reviewing it and in my discussions with each of the different schools, we talked about, are your needs being met? Do you feel like what you have is good? And we looked at actuals and what was truly being spent and what they had in their budgets prior, and some of them were like, if we're looking at, I kind of put it to the schools to think about, like, how can we best utilize the dollars that you have? So if we're looking at the same amount of dollars, like, where do you need it more? Where can have, and a lot of them in those areas of library in particular said, we have, we're good where we are, and then with this amount of money, we can still get what we need and feel like we're replenishing
Okay.
at a good rate.
Okay.
So I did reduce that down, because that was a good area to be able to say, but I really need more money for my art department.
Okay.
So,
And the librarian said that?
and so I can certainly check
Okay.
back, because this is, my meetings were with the
Yeah, no,
principal level.
I just wanna make sure, just cause I have seen stuff like over the past year about that we don't have enough money to buy these books, blah, 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 so I just wanna make sure, it's not a large amount of money, it's just more like,
And some of what, I think we talked about,
Yeah.
I went back, talked to librarians about, like, they were asking for donations for very specific book
Yeah.
titles from families, because those were like the hot topic books that kids are taking out, they wanted just to have additional books, so they
Right.
were looking, you know, to families, if you have books in good use you're getting rid of, we'll take them for our library.
Right.
It wasn't because they didn't budget for, or they would not have the money, it was just another way of looking to get those books to
Mhm.
put on the shelf.
And I do know that in my conversations with the principals, that they, prior to us meeting, you know, what we talked about was what I would like them to do is sit and talk to your staff, find out what you need, put together a list, like have those conversations with, so, again, my assumption is that yes, they've had these conversations, cause when they came and sat down at the table with me, we had this, and then we reviewed kind of what they came back with, and we made changes from there, but I will absolutely follow
Yeah.
up just to make sure.
And another thing too, that just as, while we're talking about schools and individual teachers, something that we need to be doing, not necessarily for this budget cycle, but we need to kind of have that plan, looking at the furniture that's needed in the classrooms, and when I say furniture, I also mean whiteboards or easels or what they have. Just because conversations I've had with a few teachers of, we've never been asked if we need that, or we've asked and we've told we can't buy that, so I'm going to Home Depot and buying a whiteboard, I'm like, no.
why?
Yeah,
No,
that,
you
that was
should
my
not be
other
doing that.
departmental concerns was,
Yes.
what do you
And so-
need that you feel like you're lacking?
No, that's something we need to look and see, okay, like, what is needed in these schools
Mhm.
that
Traditionally
in the
has not been
past, they've
asked
been
for,
said,
yeah.
we can't ask for it, or
Right.
we are being told, no, we're buying ourselves, because you should not be buying those things yourselves.
Oh,
Those-
I agree with you
Those are
100%.
fixtures that belong
Yeah.
in a school that we should be budgeting for.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%.
And I think that the department heads were very honest with things that they would want. I mean, they might be wish list items and they might
Yeah.
be in here, you know, the sound system for athletics or the risers at Quinn, whatever they might be, but I said, we won't know if you don't tell us. I mean,
That's exactly, like, you may get
I don't know
told
what I don't
no,
know.
but ask and
Ask.
find out, and at least
Exactly.
then, like, the thought gets put in the head, like, oh, that's an issue,
we
like,
get a grant for something and we say, oh my gosh, remember that,
Yeah.
you know, the SBA arts grant. Well, if we have this SBA arts grant, and again, I'm not trying to spend the money, but if we know that we need music risers at an elementary school and we
Right.
have a grant that is for arts and music,
Yeah.
We're meeting,
perfect place to put it.
there we go.
yeah, we have a follow-up meeting actually just on it,
Okay.
next week, but the teachers all, they know what they can spend, they're coming back
Mhm.
with their list, they're going with what the needs are, and
I'm sure they'll be
money,
full.
yeah,
Yeah.
we've had a few meetings already, so,
Yes.
and we've talked about, like, we worked with them of how it wasn't like, we didn't say, here you're getting this, like, we work together of, like, here's the amount, how are we gonna allocate this out amongst the schools?
Yeah.
What are those things that you need, and these are one-time purchases.
Right.
Don't, that's what we wanna make sure it's like, it's a one-time purchase that you have that we can
Fulfill
put in
with this,
place that's
yeah.
going to enhance your program.
And my last and final
Can I
question
just,
is,
before you ask
Yep.
your next question, I just wanna go back to something that you asked for about the charter schools and the busing. I don't know if this helps or if you saw this, but in the spreadsheet.
I did see that, yes.
There is the list of the charter
Yes.
schools, how many students we have
Yep.
enrolled, we just don't have the new students coming in yet.
Yes.
I'm still waiting for that data, and then, I don't know if we've done it before, but in the transportation line, I did add in a line so that we could put, like, out-of-district vocational school.
Okay, that's good, cause we didn't have that
So that
yet.
it's separated out, and, I'm working with the, transportation supervisor to do those breakouts.
Okay,
And some of that will come from our statewide
okay,
quote, which
Okay.
seems kind of strange, but they do break it out that way, and then I have what we have from the bus contractors.
Okay,
So, cause I
awesome.
think they go to Chariho, and there's a couple other places, so that information I have, just waiting to see if anything else comes in for
perfect.
any of the other stuff, so hopefully, it might not be in the exact way that you
No,
want
but
it,
it's, as long as it's there, I can pull it, together.
and if it's not enough detail, let me know, because at least for the charter schools and that enrollment, we have it all by student, grade,
Okay,
all of that, it already exists, that's what we
you
use
just have to pull it out.
to track
Okay.
it, so if there's something specific, I can probably, like, it's readily available that I can
Okay.
send to you.
Awesome. And then my last question was, Ken, like, like hypothetically, if we were like, yeah, go ahead, like, do all these changes with DA and do everything, costs for that, are those in here anywhere?
So, not yet,
Okay,
So,
because we have, like, the move to DA, like, we know, we're gonna need to put in a playground.
yeah,
So
so
we
I
have
would,
an estimated cost number, we know,
Yeah.
we also have funds that were in this year's budget. If we were going to move into DA,
Yeah.
that was just there, so we have some money that can go towards the
Yeah.
playground right now. This could be just costs for the move
but also, like you said,
itself.
like the physical move, so if we could get
There's-
some type of
yeah.
idea of those
Mhm.
costs, cause that factors into everything
Yes.
also, so that would be great.
and that's certainly something, so what I factored in here, and I know it's not gonna solve all of our problems, but like, Dr. Duba was saying, we have the money that was set aside for this year for us, if the administrative office is staying put and we're staying here, that money then can go, obviously, to make some changes now, before the move happens, so we can start getting it ready. And then in this budget, I did allocate the same amount of money for next year,
Okay,
for either that move, or if we did in fact have to move. So if we didn't move this year, but we needed to move next year, I've reallocated that to another year.
okay,
So potentially, that's already built in there. Again, it might not be enough, but we have this year's, and we have that same amount
Okay.
for next year already budgeted.
okay. Okay,
As a community member, I gotta end on the note back to the school committee. So I assume the other technical service for the school committee line is IQM change, or
So the
is that
program
a
that they use
one-time
right now,
thing or a permanent?
there's a one-time, and correct me if I'm wrong, so there's like an implementation fee for this year, and then, as well as the fee. And then there's a reoccurring fee, because the program they're using is sunsetting, so like
Mhm.
they can't continue to use it, so we have to get a new program. And I
But
don't know if you would
The
just wanna-
increase is 11 grand, so how much of that is one time?
You
You don't have to
numbers.
answer that.
No, we
Yeah.
have it, and I actually,
And
I
then my other
have it
question
open,
is-
so I could probably.
I'll just throw this because I'm not on the school committee. I mean, it's a 13 grand increase.
Am I correct in saying
You
that-
really need to do 5 grand of board training in a year where you're looking to fund other stuff. I would just say, take a look at the school committee line itself and maybe start with you guys.
yeah, that's an absolutely reasonable statement.
Are we using, is that program one that like the town uses, and so we're moving it so that we have
No.
kind of the same, I just,
You know,
But you're
my
not-
question
you're-
is if there's a one-time fee, again, maybe it's maybe absorbable, but again, maybe you compete it for, and it sounds like something you have to do. But it's
Well, that's
kinda
for
nice
the,
to know
that's for
that
the
it's a
program that
one-time
we use to,
fee, cause it looks like a
for the
huge
school
spike in the
committee
line.
is it for the
website,
the
right?
minutes?
Isn't
Is
that
that
where
what
we
it's for? I
keep
forget
the
what-
agendas, the minutes, the video, it's that.
Correct.
Yeah,
The one that,
website.
the one that's going end of support is
Yeah.
that component.
I mean, it's for school, but that's an IT expense, right? I mean, like, cause we couldn't say we don't wanna do any of that, right? And like, do it all by paper?
No, I get it. My
Okay.
question more was, how much of that is a one-time versus a recurring
Gotcha, okay.
change?
He actually has
Because
that.
it looks like, it was like, again, it looks like you're almost doubling the school committee budget line, so it's important to kind of know, yeah, but 80% of that is a one-time fee
Yeah.
because you gotta change the system.
And I think if I.
And then maybe you could look at supplies and materials, so I'll just leave it at that.
So that was something, so your supplies and materials, that was something that I noticed had not previously really been budgeted for what you needed and what they used, and, cause I'm approving everything that comes through, and I thought, well, this is strange, because with the number of meetings we have and the things that we do, it really needs a budget that can sustain it, so I think it has been underfunded in prior years. But I believe in the document that I gave, it lists the breakout for that program. I could be wrong. I thought I put it in, but maybe I didn't. Under central admin. Did I?
I just gotta make the community member point because it stands out. That's
No,
all.
it's a totally valid,
I might not have.
And it's 9, so we should.
Oh, gosh, okay.
You don't have to answer that. It's just, I'll throw the question out.
But, no, it's okay, I can send that to you because we do have it, and in his document, it's broken out. He has it broken out,
Yeah,
like, this is the fee, and this is what the recurring fee is. It was,
Yep.
maybe it can be what. And it is an IT expense, Jen, you are correct, that it will ultimately, they manage it, they do all of that.
Yep.
But what I try to do is put.
put it where it
them-
belongs.
Put it
Yeah.
in there so that we can see, what is just, I mean, there are some things that are just completely and entirely managed by IT,
Yeah.
and so it just rolls up, but, especially when we have a change, I want that to be like, we can notice and say, okay, we have a change, why?
Yep.
Because this is something that's happening, because we need to do it, it's just
Yep.
discussion item.
Lizzie, thank you so much for pulling this together. Like I said, so much, like eliminated probably like 90 of my questions right off the bat. So Ken's
I-
going, thank you.
Well, I will say, I mean, she worked really hard
Yeah.
over the past week, and really 2 weeks, last week, this week, and, it's great to have her
Yeah.
on board here, so.
Yeah.
And there's still, I mean, there's,
I'll
I
still
always say
look
there's always room for
Always.
improvement of what and how we're doing things. I mean, I
Right.
think we're moving in that direction. It's slow.
Yeah.
It's taking time with getting everyone in
Yep.
place, but there are things that we have to.
No, but it's not, I mean, this was like a thorough analysis also. It wasn't just like, here's the number, and I greatly appreciate it.
I think, the advice too, I think, having this new advisory committee is going to be helpful as well.
Mhm.
So I think, the advice from the group is helpful of thinking how things can be approached.
Yep.
I think it's also helpful, some of those, like, items where I was kind of vacillating, like, being new to the district, like, what do we think makes sense, has been helpful. I feel like it will cut down on some of what we have to discuss in detail
Mhm.
at the
Mhm.
actual workshop. We can say, hey, the committee discussed this and we were all on board, is the school committee okay with that? I feel like,
Yep.
it will just, help eliminate some of the lingering questions that maybe don't need to be
Yep.
asked.
So given, well, I guess we have set meetings. Sorry, I don't look beyond.
Yeah, our next
Everyone.
meeting
Yes, we do.
is,
We do.
we do have it set for
February.
monthly. It
Mhm.
is,
Let me see if I can find it on my calendar.
No, it's okay,
I have
we
it.
have one
It's-
schedule, that's.
I have it right
I
here.
think it's February 10th.
I was just looking at it. It's like the 16th?
We had a holiday in there which threw us off, so it might be the 24th.
Oh, it's the 4th.
no, it can't be the fourth, we have school committee.
Oh, that's the school
No, that's the
committee.
next
That's-
budget
That's the
workshop.
actual one,
That's
yeah.
the
Oh,
actual
budget,
budget
and we're the
workshop.
24th, yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I think when we were originally making this, the thought was is that if we felt like we needed to have, like, say, the budget workshops are going sideways, and we needed to have this committee meet again while we were doing that, then we certainly could, that we can move these
Yep.
around if we needed to.
And what we can do on the 24th, we can bring back everything too, right?
Mhm.
At that point of just reviewing.
I don't know if that makes sense.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
No
Sorry.
discussion on
That's
the
all
motion
right.
to adjourn.
I'm getting like 90 texts from my ride out there.